Thank you, Carol. Greetings, everyone. I greatly appreciate your being here. Here's a short clip from Three Dog Night.
To the music, celebrate, celebrate, dance to the music, celebrate, celebrate, dance to the music.
During my research for a storm coming, I found myself asking this question. As far back as the American Revolution, a new state of West Sylvania was being considered. A petition to form the state was presented to the Continental Congress on the grounds that the mountains made it an almost impossible barrier to the east. The rugged nature of the county certainly made slavery unprofitable. The population consisted of a variety of immigrants, Germans, Scots, and Irish, to name a few. They came mostly from Pennsylvania, but there were also immigrants from northern states. As time passed, social, political, and economic differences grew between those who lived west of the mountains and those who lived to the eastern side of the mountains. Slavery was a big issue as the new U.S. Constitution was being hammered out in Philadelphia. The southern colonies wanted slaves to be counted when determining a state's total population because the representation in a new lower house of Congress would be based on population. Southerners wanted to offset the more populous northern states. A compromise, later known as the Three-Fifths Compromise, was proposed. 3 out of every 5 slaves would be counted in the population. The compromise was hotly debated, but it was passed. The Three-Fifths Compromise gave the southern states a third more seats in Congress and a third more electoral votes than if the slaves had been ignored. As you can see from this slide showing the distribution of slaves by county, most of the slaves lived in the eastern counties. During the State Constitution Convention of 1829, the slaveholding counties were given the benefit of the Three-Fifths Rule in apportioning the state's House of Delegates. In addition, property taxes were less on slaves than other property, causing those counties with few or no slaves to pay proportionately more taxes. To make matters worse, for the folks living in western counties, an unfair rule for voting was proposed by and passed by the eastern majority. A lot of folks living in the western counties were upset over the suffrage qualification, which restricted voting to only white males with 25 acres improved or 50 acres of unimproved land. Many Westerners couldn't vote and openly expressed their desire to secede from Virginia and form a new state. Their objections, however, mattered little, as the new Constitution was easily carried by the Eastern majority. It took almost 20 years of debating and complaining by the Western counties before the Easterners took appeasement actions. At first glance, it appears that the Easterners finally came to their senses in the 1850 Constitution Convention. Any white male over 21 was given the right to vote. More western counties were created to increase representation in the House of Delegates. State roads were built over the mountains to improve communications. But on closer examination, Westerners realized the Easterners never lost control of the state. Just when the Western Virginians needed a champion, a great supporter of their cause appeared. In 1856, Archibald Campbell purchased the Wheeling Daily Intelligencer, and through his thoughtful editorials and political activities, he influenced many people, including President Lincoln. He truly became one of the founding fathers of the state. In 1860, Lincoln won the presidential election. He had the most electoral votes, but got only 39% of the popular votes. Does that sound familiar? Was his election due to too many candidates? Even if you add the electoral votes for southern-leaning states of Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri to those of the Cotton states, and even with the 3/5 rule, Lincoln would still win the election. Was the election all about money and slavery? Both the North and the South profited from the slave economy, but Lincoln sounded to the Southerners like he would limit slave trade in the new territories. This upset the Cotton states, who looked upon the new U.S. territories as a means of expanding their economies. Cotton was king, and Southern states had the world market. To continue expanding, more land and slaves were needed. These 7 Southern Cotton states seceded from the Union even before Lincoln took office. Note the political cartoon. It shows 2 Southern states seceding by cutting on the wrong side of their limb of the Union tree. A couple of weeks later, on February 13, 1861, Governor Letcher called a session of the state legislature to debate Virginia's position related to secession. This upset the Western County delegates because all former conventions were held only after authorization by a vote of the people. Westerners made it clear that they would take action to form a new state if Virginia seceded. They also complained about the unfair property tax. On April 4th, delegates voted 95 against secession to 45 for secession. So what happened to change their minds? After lengthy negotiations over the presence of a federal fort in the Charleston, South Carolina harbor, to the cheers of South Carolinians, General Beauregard ordered Southern cannons to fire on the federal forces in the Fort Sumter, forcing them to surrender. President Lincoln called an emergency session of Congress, following the policy set down by President George Washington to put down the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. Lincoln announced a call for 75,000 militiamen, apportioned among all the states who had not already seceded, to suppress the rebellion of the Cotton states. Virginia and 3 other states refused to send militia.